Thank you for joining us here today for the third session of the winter webinar series. I wasn't able to attend the first two sessions, so you guys haven't seen me yet this year, but thank you for joining the program. This is the second year that I've done this program, and it's just meant to be a bunch of different topics for a beginner gardener or a beginner homeowner. So hopefully these sessions have helped you, and I hope that the first two sessions went well as well with John and Bill. If you need a reminder, make sure that you put all your questions in the Q&A, and I will answer those at the end of the presentation if we have time. Otherwise, I can always follow up with you afterwards. And then you can use the chat box. So make sure that you have the ability to do that. Everyone should be able to chat with each other, but we do have Lauren on today that will help out if there is any tech issues as well. So today I'll be talking about a beginner's guide to houseplants. And I should say that I'm Emily. I am the horticulture educator for Wright, McLeod, and Meeker counties. And today I'm really taking a beginner approach to this presentation because I am also a beginner houseplant parent. I didn't really start having houseplants until about 4 years ago when I started this job. So I've definitely learned a lot along the way. And I've definitely been a beginner. So hopefully this information will help you out today. But a question that I have for you in the chat is, who has the oldest living house plant? So if you want to put your answer in the chat, you could say the house plant and how old it is. So the name of the house plant and how old it is. I recently attended a presentation where someone did this, and there was a 300-year-old Christmas cactus. Peace lily, 20 years. Awesome. 30 years. Wow. Hibiscus, 21 years. Wow, an aloe, 65 years. Spider plant, 1 week. Awesome. Christmas cactus, Linda, nice. 140 years old. That's awesome. 65 years for a Christmas cactus, 10 years for a Christmas cactus. Jade plant, 27. I'm not sure if anyone will beat the person that has had a 300-year-old Christmas cactus. Hopefully that was true information that they were telling me. I've never heard of anyone having one that's over 300 years old. All right, we'll move on to our agenda for today. So we'll talk about why you should get houseplants, or maybe some reasons that you didn't know about why you have them and why they can be good for you. We'll talk about right plant, right place. So making sure that before you even get a houseplant or you buy one from the store, that you have the right conditions for it, like light, water, soil, fertilizer, and then the pots as well we'll touch on. I'll also give you some ideas for beginner-friendly house plants. So most of them I've had experience with, some are new. So a lot of you people that have years old house plants are going to be way more experienced with this type of stuff. So I really encourage you to put any tips in the chat for people that are starting as well. We'll talk about pests and problems, some resources, and then wrap up and reflection. Some learning objectives for today. You'll be able to relate your personal indoor environments to houseplant selection and care. You will be able to apply practical techniques for maintaining healthy houseplants. You will be able to identify and respond to common houseplant problems. And then you'll also reflect on the benefits of houseplants for personal well-being and also sustainable living. So, what does the research actually say when it comes to houseplants and their benefits, or maybe not so many benefits? Well, we do know that people spend a significant amount of time indoors in an indoor environment where houseplants typically are. And more specifically, this study indicated that 95% of our individual activities take place in an indoor environment. So we're really inside almost 100% of the time. So how can houseplants help us as essentially indoor beings? Because most of our activities are inside. So we'll go over some research studies here. This first one was from 2023, and most of the studies that I'll talk about today are fairly recent. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You can look at the top here for the citation, for noting the year, and then the authors, as well as the title. So this one talks about the neurophysiological benefits of watering plants while also engaging in mental tasks. So the methodology in this research study, it was conducted in China, and they had 50 participants that were young adults, ages 20 to 21. And they were randomized, these participants, into two groups. And the researchers compared the benefits of watering houseplants. So the one group was watering houseplants, and then the other group was standing and performing a computer task, so more of like a mental task. And then measurements were taken during the activity. And you can see in the picture on the right that the participants are doing the mental task, standing on a computer, and then also watering the plants too at the bottom there. And their findings were from these measurements that watering plants reduced blood pressure without affecting your pulse rate. There was also a difference in brainwave activity in the two tasks. And there was a lot of big brain words that were in these findings. But this is a pretty simple way of saying that there was a difference in brainwave activity, and the participants self-reported that they felt happier and also more relaxed when doing the watering of the plant. There was also a similar study to this from 2015, and the citation from that was in the quote that I gave about 95% of us being indoors. So that's that study. And it was very similar to this, and it compared transplanting plants and also doing a computer task. But the difference in that case, in that study, was that the participants did both tasks. So instead of splitting them up into two groups, they both transplanted and then they also did a computer task. And the findings for that 2015 study were very similar to what was found in this 2023 one. Here is another study from 2022 on the effects of indoor plants on human functions. And the methodology behind this one is that they basically just gathered and analyzed a bunch of different previously published studies on indoor plants and human health to basically identify consistent patterns and overall effects throughout all of those different articles. So they reviewed 42 peer-reviewed studies. And in those studies, they only analyzed the physiological, which would include heart rate, blood pressure, cognitive, behavioral outcomes. And they also included the psychological outcomes. So like stress, mood, anxiety, basically relating to interacting with or being exposed to indoor plants anywhere in these studies. And it included both lab and real world settings as well in all the studies that they reviewed. And their findings from this meta-analysis was that plants help lower stress signals in the body, like your heart rate and blood pressure. It improved mood and reduced feelings of anxiety. And also it boosted focus, attention, and performance on tasks in environments with indoor plants. This next study is another fairly recent study from 2024 the role of indoor plants in improving air and mind. And this was another review. So they basically collected and analyzed other studies on indoor plants and their effects on air quality and also human well-being. And they looked at both health, so their stress, their mood, and also environmental air quality outcomes. And then they compared the results again from all of these different studies to identify patterns and overall just draw conclusions, general conclusions about the benefits of indoor plants. And what they found was that indoor plants clean the air and remove pollutants like carbon dioxide. The VOCs is volatile organic compounds, and then also ozone. And then they also found that there were more psychological benefits and that exposure to indoor plants reduced stress and anxiety and also improved mood and cognitive function. And then another final finding was that certain plant setups can boost focus and mental performance as well. This one, I didn't include the study per se, but the title of the study is the NASA Clean Air Study. And it was from 1989, which is why I did not include it. But I did include a table of the lists of pollutants, kind of in relation to our previous study that we looked at, their source, and also the different houseplants that can remove those pollutants. So benzene, source of that would be like detergents or tobacco smoke, and like in English, ivy can help remove that pollutant. Formaldehyde, plywood, cigarette smoke, pothos, spider plant, and then trichloroethylene, basically like a degreaser. A peace lily could remove that as well. So another study on the impacts of air quality. And then this study, this one should be the final study that we're going to cover. This one was very recent, 2025. Biophilic Design and Restorative Effects, a neuropsychological study of healthy indoor workspaces in urban contexts. This one was super interesting to read because their methodology included nurses. So 21 nurses participated in the study, so it is a small sample size, but the nurses had two different conditions for 10 minutes. So there was a control room, and the control room was just plain white walls. And then the second condition was a biophilic space, so a nature space essentially, where the walls were entirely coated with plants and vegetation. And they measured brain activity again in this one using the NIRS, near infrared spectroscopy. And then they also did psychological surveys that the nurses took that assessed fatigue, anxiety, and mood. And basically, the goal of this study was to examine whether these nature spaces or having biophilic spaces within hospitals could provide restorative benefits for nurses working in a really high stress environment. And their findings were that the biophilic spaces or the green walls reduce the brain activity linked to stress. It also lowered levels of fatigue, anxiety, and depression. And then it increased feelings of restorativeness and attentiveness in the nurses as well. So this was a lot of information, a lot of studies that we covered. So I will not be sharing the slides. I see that in the chat here, but we do have an email that will go out that will include the citations for this study that will have the links, and then the recording will be posted on YouTube as well. So let's get into right plant, right place. So we've established that houseplants are good for our health and our well-being based on these previous surveys. But we also want to make sure that before we pull the trigger on having plants come in and take the pollutants out of our home, that they have the right environment to survive in. And the first one that I'll talk about is light. The light is really the most important factor, I would say, in houseplant care, but is essentially very understood. The light really dictates the growth potential of your plant, and watering, fertilizing, and other care measures essentially just realize this potential. That's why I think light is the top factor for houseplants. And right now, if you just talk to, anyone or read articles, the current system for defining light is, well, just put your houseplant in bright indirect light. Okay, so what does that actually mean? Like, that's super frustrating. Like, bright indirect light, does the light hit it once per day? Or, is there a curtain in front of it? Like, it's just too vague. And there really is no objective or measurable meaning behind what bright indirect light actually means. It just kind of makes you think like, well, indirect, that's just basically any place where the sun doesn't shine. So I attended a presentation from someone at a conference, and his name is Daryl Chang. And this is his Instagram handle if anyone follows him or wants to follow him. And his approach was super interesting to light. And he took an engineer's approach to houseplant care, is basically what his presentation was about. And it was essentially really all about light and how to make sure that your houseplants have the right amount of light. And one of the ways that you can make it measurable if you really want is by using a light meter. So this is a picture of it on the right-hand side here. I currently do not have a light meter. I have not invested in one. But after the presentation, I kind of learned more about light in general. So I just hoped that my plants would do good. You'll definitely learn throughout this presentation that I'm a very lazy and neglectful house plant parent. But I would recommend it if you do feel like your plants are not doing as well, they're not getting enough light, investing in a light meter. And essentially what I learned from this presentation is that this little like reflective ball at the top just measures the amount of sun that's going in, and then it'll tell you how much light is there in foot candles. So the 744 FC is like the foot candles, so the amount of light. And this guy, Daryl Chang, he put together a table of the guidelines of the amount of light that you would need at the houseplantjournal.com. And this is a screenshot of the table. And this is just the A's. So, it goes A to Z. So he has a whole table of what the minimum indirect light levels are. So the foot candles, and then the good indirect light levels. So like up to 400 foot candles. And then their tolerance for direct sun. And he just goes in and puts in the names of all the plants, and then he will, have a comment on there if there's anything to be aware of. So I would highly suggest if you are someone that wants something a little bit more objective and measurable, that getting a light meter will be worth it to you. So bright indirect light. I did not invest, like I said, in a light meter. I probably should. But the biggest thing from this presentation that I learned from him is that when you are thinking about light and your house plants, you want to put the plant where it will have the widest possible view of the sky. So that little, let's see if I can go back here. That little like ball there at the top, reflective ball, is basically just measuring the sun across the sky. And so if you just like think in your head how that would work in your situation and how well your plant could have the widest possible view of the sky, That would be a good way to measure. If you do have a light meter, if you think that you have a south-facing window that has direct sun that exceeds 2 to 3 hours per day, you can put a curtain, and that would be essentially indirect. And so what this doesn't mean is that anywhere the sun doesn't shine is fine. You just want to make sure that you put it as close to the window as possible where it has that wide view of the sky. It does not mean avoiding direct sunlight entirely. You just want to make sure that you avoid prolonged exposure to the light. So I would really consider your light situation before getting a house plant. Watering is another one. Improper watering or overwatering is one of the most common ways of killing house plants. And so when we think about watering, I want you to consider the 3 levels of need while also considering adequate light given, because obviously if it's in more sun, it'll dry out quicker. So the 3 levels of need include completely dry. That's usually for like succulents. Partially dry is like tropical type plants. And then evenly moist is like a fern. So they like a little bit more water. And then just some rules of thumb for how often to water. You want to make sure that you're watering deeper and less often. And you can basically check the soil moisture with your finger. So if it feels like it's dry, 2 inches down, it probably needs some water. Another interesting fact that I learned about water is that using room temperature water and watering earlier in the day is better to use, as the room temperature water kind of mimics like rainwater, so it avoids shocking plant roots. So I thought that was interesting. So the basic rule of watering is when in doubt, don't water, because overwatering is one of the most common ways to kill your house plants. So let's move on to soil. Really, the soil depends on the type of house plant that you have. The most common is an all-purpose potting soil. And these are just pictures. I'm not necessarily endorsing any of these products to use. These are just examples. And so the all-purpose potting soil is at the top there. And then there's also like specialty soil, especially for like cactus and succulents that like the sandy soil, the fast draining. I actually got one that was in like an orange bag like this for like my succulents, that like a little bit more sandy soil. And then like orchids. I have not been good at orchids. They're not a very good beginner-friendly plant, but the orchid bark is another soil, specialty soil that you could consider if you are using or planting orchids. So just making sure that you are checking which plant you have with the recommendations for soil and matching that correctly. The all-purpose soil, I will say, it may be soilless. It must be sterile, and then it's usually made of like peat moss, compost, perlite, loam, like big combination of it too. Fertilizer is another thing to consider when getting a house plant. The standard recommendations are feeding once a month, April to September. And the reason why it is April to September is that growing slows down throughout the winter. Another thing about the winter is that there's less light in the winter as well. So another reason why growth slows down. But an all-purpose slow release plant food is recommended. I'm just using Osmocote as a good example of a slow release plant food that you could use in your situation. And then we want to make sure that we are avoiding over fertilizing, since that does more harm than good. So there are specific recommendations on like how often to plant based on each plant, but just like the general recommendation is feeding once a month. But there's a good resource that I'll talk about at the end that may help you get a little bit more specific. So let's think about pots. So lots of questions about pots in general, I guess. I guess throughout the time of me working here in Extension. Um, but when we do think about planting house plants, you want to choose a pot that is a little bit bigger than what the planter came in. And then another thing to think about is that it needs a drainage hole to prevent root rot. I've gotten house plants as presents before, and the pots did not come with a drainage hole, so my house plants definitely got some root rot on them. So one drainage hole is recommended, but if you have like a really, really big pot, you could definitely do two or more drainage holes. And then I usually get like the little plastic like catchers at Menards or something. It's just like a little plastic saucer that catches the water from the pot once it drains out. And in terms of the type of pot for succulents and cactus, they like well draining soil. So you really want a porous planter, which would include like a terracotta pot or like concrete. And then for tropical plants, like a peace lily or a spider plant, they like consistent soil moisture. And so a ceramic, glazed, or plastic pot would work for that. And basically, these like plastic pots lack the ability for air to move through them. So that's why it keeps the soil as moist as it does. Okay, so we'll get into beginner-friendly house plants. And once again, just a reminder, this is a very beginner level presentation. So if you do have any comments about the types of plants, you can certainly put that in the chat as well if you have any more advice for people. So the first one we'll start with is a peace lily. I don't have experience as much with a peace lily, but it is more of a rounded shape. The sunlight it can take is about moderate. The temperatures are average. I see that there's a question in the chat about being too close to a window, like with winter coming on, that could definitely affect. Obviously, the temperature and then the drafts could also affect the growth of the plant as well. Watering a peace lily is average. You want to make sure to keep the soil moist, and the leaves will wilt when the plants are dry too. So that's when you'll kind of know if it needs some water. You can propagate via division, and this one is not pet friendly. But this was also one that was on the NASA Clean Air study as well. Pothos is another good beginner plant because it will tolerate some to maybe a lot of neglect. It has a trailing habit, so it'll kind of fall down. Maybe good for like a planter that you're gonna hang up or at the top of a shelf. The sunlight that it'll take is like bright, indirect, more general terminology of light again. But it will tolerate low light. It'll grow best in your home and just your average temperature. The water that it will take is pretty dry to average, but you want to make sure that you allow the soil to dry moderately between watering. And then a lot of people do propagate the pothos with stem and tip cutting, and this was one that was not pet friendly, so extremely toxic it was listed as. Jade plant is another one that is beginner friendly. I have tried to do a jade plant, and for some reason, I'm just not good at doing jade plants. But it is upright. It's like a little bonsai tree looking thing. The sunlight it will take is lots of light, but I have seen it take lower light, so it can be adaptable, and grows best in a variety of temperatures. The soil, you want to make sure that you have well-drained soil, especially like the cactus or the succulent type soil, like with the sandiness to it, so it dries out. In terms of watering, this is one that you could definitely overwater. Maybe that's probably why I haven't had good luck with jade plants, is I probably overwater it. But you want to make sure that the soil is dried out before you're watering it. Propagation, stem and the leaf cuttings are really common. And these are pretty easy to propagate as well. And this one is not pet friendly either. Spider plant. I've had a spider plant before. This one's super easy. It's a little bit more of a rounded format. I have had this like on a shelf or like hanging up on a ceiling because it kind of like trails, like the offshoots of it called the plantlets, they kind of trail down. The sunlight is pretty bright or indirect, grows best in average temperatures, and you'll need like well-draining soil with about average water. So making sure it's moist, but still checking to make sure you don't overwater it. I would say this is a very easy house plant to grow. It was also on the air purifying list and is pet friendly too. Aloe is another common house plant, and this is specifically for medicinal aloe. I think there is another type of botanical name for aloe, but I did not include that one since a lot of people do have medicinal aloe vera, and they do use it for that way as well. Um, Upright habit, bright sunlight. I will say that I have had success with the aloe vera not being in a lot of sun. So it is adaptable to low light temperatures or low light situations, excuse me. It does grow best in average temperatures, so an average home. You want to make sure for aloe that you do have good drainage and you're having that succulent mix. And then for watering, making sure that the soil dries out in between. And this is one that I have definitely neglected, and it's really been doing just fine. This was on the list of air purifying plants as well. It is medicinal, so people and I have taken cuttings of the aloe plant for like sunburns or like scratches or anything, and then I just cut the aloe plant open and put the sap on the wound or the burn. And this one was listed as not pet friendly. Chinese money plant. This one I decided to include because I recently just got this one at the Hennepin County Master Gardener house plant sale. And it's pretty interesting. I like the shape of it, and it seems so far to be doing good and more beginner friendly. But I learned that this is native to a province in southern China, and they usually associate this plant with good luck, wealth, and prosperity, which is probably why it is called the Chinese money plant. It will take bright indirect light. I have a low light situation going on right now where the money plant is, and I am actually surprised at how well it's doing. Based on how I took it from the plant sale, it looks way better. Average temperature, in-home temperatures, the soil needs to be well drained as this one does not like to sit in water. And then this one is pretty infrequent watering. And this one is pet friendly too. The ZZ plant is super low maintenance, but it is also slow growing, and we usually get about 2 to 3 feet tall. This is a picture of my ZZ plant that I have that I took this morning. Just I moved it just so it gets maybe a little bit more light, but it does tolerate really, really low light. It does have an upright habit. And it has these glossy leaves, I think that you can see on the picture here, like how they look. I will say this is a really good beginner plant, especially for people that may live in an apartment or a townhome. I used to live in a townhome, and this plant was given to me by the master gardeners as an easy plant to grow, and it truly is an easy plant to grow. It was in my kitchen in my townhome where there literally was no light at all, and it really thrived, and it even put out little baby shoots to propagate as well. So very, very beginner friendly. You do need well-draining soil and watering infrequently is the best way to water it. And it is drought tolerant. And I just learned that it has these like thick rhizomes that help it to store water, which is why it is so drought tolerant. I don't think that I have watered this ZZ plant in 4 months. So you can definitely get away with not watering it. See, I don't have my little plastic saucer under this one. So that means I literally have not watered it since we moved to our new house, which is on the windowsill right now. And it's doing really good. This one is not pet friendly though and can be mildly toxic. It also can cause irritation for humans too. So if you touch the sap on the leaves and then like rub your skin or your eyes, it just can irritate them. And then the last plant that I'll talk about is the snake plant. I have lots of snake plants at my house, and I think I have an issue of hoarding snake plants at my house because they are super easy to grow. And the snake plant that I'll talk about today is the one that gets about 2 to 4 feet tall. There are like miniature ones, and I didn't include the miniature one's botanical name. But this one does have an upright habit, gets pretty tall. I think mine is probably in the 2.5 to 3 foot area. For light, it does tolerate very low indirect light. So that's why I had a lot of these at my townhome where we did not have a lot of windows. It does grow best in warmer temperatures with well-draining soil. This was the one I was talking about that was in a pot that did not have a drainage hole. It was gifted to me, so it got root rot really, really bad. It just like stunted it too. The watering, this one you just want to keep dry and allow it to dry between watering. Just like my ZZ plant, I have not watered my snake plants in like 4 months and they still look really, really good. I have propagated my snake plants before through the vision of the snake plants, and I have not tried the leaf cutting yet. But this is a big one for the air purifying properties. It is not pet friendly though, and I included a picture of my cat, Butter, because a lot of the plants that I talked about today were not really pet friendly, but he somehow still bites them and he does not die. So cats either have 9 lives or he just bites it, gets a little irritation, and then walks away. I will say, not all cats are as indestructible and stupid as my cat, Butter. So I would just make sure that if you do have any of these plants at your home that are not pet friendly, that you just keep an eye on your pet if you do see them gnawing at the leaves. Because most of the plants that are toxic can cause like gastrointestinal problems with the cat or just not make them feel very good. So just keep an eye on your pet if you do try any of these beginner plants. So we'll now get into pests and problems. The first one being insufficient light. You'll see the plants looking kind of sad. They have like small leaves. They're just not like as full as they could be, or they just have really weak, spindly growth. They also will not flower or have really poor flowering. They'll lose their leaves, drop their buds. And some variegated plants may even revert back to a solid green color. Too much light is a big one that I would say. I've been dealing with this because I left my plants outside for a while when we were moving, and so they got sunburnt a lot. So they look just like this. They have the leaves curling at the tip. They have these blotches on them, and the plants will kind of like fade to a lighter color, and they'll just like turn brown and die off. I have been just taking out and pruning out the leaves that did brown and die so that the plant does not put any energy into those ones anymore. And that was mainly with my snake plants. And I think this kind of looks like a snake plant too. These are some of the symptoms of underwatering and overwatering. So if you are underwatering, you can see those dry brown leaf tips, and they'll just kind of like turn brown or die or become wilted, like this graphic here. And then they'll stunt as well. So obviously they won't grow or you won't see growth. I haven't really seen my snake plants grow that much, so I'm probably underwatering. I probably am because I haven't watered in 4 months. But this is the symptoms of overwatering. You can get root rot, like I said. The roots may develop on the stems with all that water up top, or it's just trying to get like oxygen at the top. And then the leaves can also turn yellow and drop. This is a nice graphic of what that might look like. So we'll kind of wrap up here with insect and disease control. So when you are buying plants, I have learned this the hard way. You want to examine plants closely before purchasing. So just looking at their leaves, their stems, like on the surface of the soil. And then a good rule of thumb is to isolate the plants for 2 weeks. You can prune out any bug or disease infested portion of the plant, and then you can treat as well. And then if it is stressed, making sure that you're not fertilizing or applying any chemicals. I have I should be isolating my plants, but I have repotted some plants because of some bugs. So we'll get into 3 of the big ones. So the first one is mealy bugs. They are super hard to eliminate. We have some really good resources on the extension site about insect pests. So I would encourage you to take a look at those. But the white little fuzzy puffball things in the picture are kind of what mealybugs look like. And they produce this sticky substance called honeydew on the plant. So that's what it could feel like as well. And they really like to hide in hard to reach places. So you'll see them at like the leaf and stem like crevices, if that makes sense. And the control measure or treatment is just basically quarantining new plants because you don't want to introduce mealybugs to your other plants because it is so difficult to control, but different horticultural oils and soaps can help. Next is spider mites. Spider mites thrive in really warm and dry conditions. So as we're entering the winter here in Minnesota, these may become more prevalent in the home because it is warmer, it is drier. They are hard to spot right away unless you have a large population, and you'll see kind of like the webbing is really a big sign that you have spider mites. Hopefully you can see that in the picture here. It is kind of hard to tell, but there is webbing in there. They will have some leaf damage and then seeing the mites themselves. You will be able to scout for these or check your plants by taking, say, like a white piece of paper, and then you would put that white piece of paper underneath the leaf, and then you would like tap the leaf onto that white piece of paper, and you could essentially scout for them that way. For treatment and control, washing your house plants is a good idea. And then you could also use horticultural oils and insecticidal soaps too. And then finally, my arch nemesis is fungus gnats. I have dealt with fungus gnats so much. And they're like these little small dark flies. And you probably think that they're like fruit flies. and they basically just lay their eggs in like really moist soil, and then their larvae will feed on that like decaying organic matter in the soil. Sometimes it'll feed on like the plant roots, and it just causes yellowing leaves, wilting, slow growth. And fungus gnats thrive in really damp conditions, so overwatered plants are really vulnerable to this. For fungus gnats, I have started just like repotting my plants that I get from like stores um, or from other people too. So I've tried to not introduce them by doing that and repotting them, but that can be a lot for some people. So you can just isolate them or quarantine them um, before you introduce them to the whole population. And some of the treatment that you can use is making sure that you're drying out the soil. Another way to kind of check to see if you have fungus gnats that won't necessarily get rid of all of them. You can use these yellow sticky traps, and those are pretty available at garden centers or online, and they will catch the adult fungus gnats. So basically, the yellow traps essentially just reduce the number of adults laying eggs in the soil. Another recommendation, I have not tried this, was putting a barrier on the top of the soil. I'd be interested to know if anyone on this webinar has put a barrier. So you would essentially just put like a thin layer of sand or like gravel on the top of the pot to make it harder for those adult fungus gnats to get to the soil and lay their eggs. So I'd be interested to see if anyone has done that. Prevention for fungus gnats. You want to make sure that you're overwatering because they thrive in those damp conditions. So they'll really like it if you're giving them too much water. You want to make sure that you're removing dead leaves and debris, and then using well-draining soil too. You could also bottom water. That will help the plant kind of take the water that they need while also keeping the soil surface dry and discouraging the fungus gnats. This is another reason why I have not watered my snake plants in 4 months, because usually every time I water them, I see fungus gnats going around. So they're just never going to get any water, I guess. So wrapping up now, we're going to talk about some of the resources that I usually turn to that you could use as well. I used a lot of Wisconsin and Iowa State information and pictures for this presentation, but just a reminder that university extension pages are really great resources. And these two specifically had like really nice specific pages about houseplants, and then also like types of houseplants too. Like I referred to Wisconsin a lot for some of like the specifics about houseplants, and then they have really good videos as well if you are kind of like that visual learner. Books. This is the book that I bought right away, The Houseplant Guide by Lee Miller. And it basically has a list of plants and their common names from A to Z. And it'll go through like the light requirements, the soil requirements for the plant, and then if it's pet friendly or not. So it just gives a nice like 1-page description and paragraph about the plant. It'll also talk about like growing recommendations in general, especially like the pot stuff that we covered, like using ceramic plastic pots, terracotta pots. And then it also has maintenance tips as well. And then it does include chapters on air purifying plants, so all the different types of air purifying plants, and then all of the pet friendly plants as well. So it's a nice like one-stop shop for house plants. These were other books that I saw that Penn State Extension recommended. The first one is the Houseplant Expert, and the second picture here is the inside of the book, and it looks like it just goes into a little bit more specifics about houseplant care, especially, this picture of the light requirements and, how close to put plants to windows and such. So that could be another resource for you. And then these other two books were recommended by Penn State Extension as well. So Easy Care Guide to Houseplants by Jack Kramer, and then the Houseplant Encyclopedia. Another one that could be helpful is The New Plant Parent by Daryl Chang. And if you remember from earlier in the presentation, Daryl is the one that talked about the light meters. So this one I have not invested in yet, but I do plan to invest in someday. So wrapping up now, I want you to just kind of sit for about 30 seconds and think about all the information that was presented today and just reflect on that and reflect on what is one takeaway that you will try to implement in your houseplant care or helping other people with their houseplants, or if you have new houseplants too. So you can reflect on that for 30 seconds, and then if you would like to put your answer in the chat, that would be great too. And that would give you time to do that. Buy more plants. That is awesome, Chris. Overwatering and how to check for spider mites. Will be more diligent about monitoring my watering. Awesome. Probably water too much. Yeah. Good. Well, if anyone has any more questions about houseplants specifically, or maybe about this webinar in general, this is my email, so you can take a picture. I'm sure you have it from the emails that are sent out. But thank you for attending today, and I will stop share and see if there are any questions. Make sure plants have enough light as we're going to the dark season. Yep. Switch out succulent containers. Neem oil is another way to help with the pests. Importance of light levels explains a lot why some of my plants are not thriving. Yeah, definitely. Keeping aloe vera dry enough. Is potting soil well draining already? Usually the all-purpose should be. The, extra well draining for like cactus and like sandy soil will definitely be a little bit more well draining than others. Hopefully that helps. Are there any plants that help reduce radon? That is a really good question, and I am not sure about that. I don't think so, because that would be pretty good to know. So does anyone know in the chat if there are any houseplants that reduce radon? I'm not sure if there is. I don't think so, though. I can certainly look and follow up about that as well. Much less watering over the winter months and learned more about pet-friendly plants. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for taking the time to reflect on the presentation today. We will end the presentation, and I just want to remind you that once you exit out of this Zoom screen, there is an evaluation, and I would encourage you to take it. A lot of the comments from last year were used in helping to create this year's presentation. So I truly do use all the information in that evaluation and also send it to the other speakers too. And so our next session will be November 4th, Tuesday, November 4th, and that should be about dahlias. So that would be a really nice one to kind of start the winter with some nice pictures of dahlias. So thank you again for joining the presentation, and we will see you in 2 weeks.